An atheist professor thought he had the upper hand until Barron Trump turned the tables with just one sentence. Dr. Graves wasn't just a professor, he was a spectacle. His lectures at Stanford University's philosophy department weren't classes, they were performances. He commanded the room with sharp intellect and an even sharper tongue, dismantling belief systems like a craftsman, taking apart an old watch. His reputation stretched far beyond campus. Clips of his debates had gone viral on social media, where he was either celebrated as a fearless champion of rational thought or condemned as an arrogant intellectual who took pleasure in tearing down faith. His students knew what to expect. The first day of class was always a test. He would scan the room, picking out students who wore religious symbols, cross necklaces, hijabs, yarmulkes. Then he'd fire off questions designed to make them squirm. So tell me, do you believe because you've examined every possibility, or because someone told you to? If God exists, why hasn't he struck me down for mocking him right now? Do you ever wonder if faith is just a metal crutch for those who can't handle reality? It wasn't just about the questions. It was the way he asked them, smirking, challenging daring students to answer in a way that wouldn't make them look foolish. Some tried, some held their ground, but most just stumbled through their responses, their words unraveling under the weight of his scrutiny. He thrived on it. And it wasn't just students who felt his sharp edge. Colleagues spoke of him with reluctant admiration. He was brilliant. Yes, but impossible to debate. Anyone who stepped into an argument with him had to be prepared for intellectual warfare. He had an uncanny ability to twist words, to lead someone down a path of logic, until they realized, too late, they had walked straight into a trap. But for all his confidence, there was one thing about Dr. Graves that no one could quite figure out. Why did he hate faith so much? Some speculated he had grown up in a strict religious household and rebelled. Others believed he had suffered a loss that turned him against God, but Graves never shared his past. He only made one thing clear: faith was dangerous, illogical, and something that needed to be exposed for what it really was, an illusion. And so year after year he played the same game. He prided himself on breaking down religious students until they either abandoned their beliefs or learned to keep them to themselves. Then one semester, Barron Trump walked into his class, but this time things wouldn't go as planned. The lecture hall was packed as always. Some students were there for the syllabus, others for the spectacle. Dr. Graves had a reputation, and even those who weren't in his class would occasionally drop in just to see him work. Today was one of those days. The topic on the whiteboard read, "Faith in Modern Society, Rational Foundation or Outdated Myth." Dr. Graves leaned against his desk, his usual smirk in place. His sleeves were rolled up just enough to give the impression that this was going to be a casual discussion. It wasn't. Barron Trump took his usual seat near the center of the room. He wasn't the kind of student who faded into the background. At 6'7", he carried a presence that was impossible to ignore, but it wasn't just his height. It was his demeanor. While others slouched or scrolled through their laptops, Barron sat upright, his expression unreadable over the past few weeks. He had caught Dr. Graves' attention, not because of his last name. That detail meant little in a room where intellectual sparring ruled, but because he was quiet, too quiet. Most students, when challenged, either shrank or scrambled for an argument. Barron did neither. He listened, processed, and responded only when necessary. He never raised his voice. He never got flustered. He was an anomaly in a sea of students, trying too hard to impress. And there was one more thing he always wore: a cross necklace, a simple silver chain, nothing ostentatious, but noticeable enough. Dr. Graves had been waiting for the right moment to challenge him, and today that moment arrived. As he scanned the room, his eyes landed on Barron's chest. No necklace. His smirk widened. No cross necklace. Today, he asked, his voice just loud enough for the entire room to hear, "I guess the faith was just a prop." A few students chuckled, but it was the nervous kind, the kind that came from knowing what was about to happen. Barron didn't flinch. He didn't shift in his seat or scramble for an excuse. He simply met Dr. Graves's gaze, his face unreadable. A pause, then his voice even and calm. If my faith was just a prop, you wouldn't feel the need to comment on its absence. The air changed. The smirk on Dr. Graves's face faltered. For a fraction of a second, so quick that most students missed it. But Barron saw silence stretched across the room, heavy and expectant. Even those who had been half listening were now locked in. This was supposed to be another moment where Graves dismantled a student with ease, but something was different, and for the first time in years, it wasn't the professor who was in control of the discussion. The weight of Barron's words settled over the room, like a slow-building storm. The students who had chuckled before now sat in silence, eyes flicking between him and Dr. Graves, waiting for the professor's counter. Dr. Graves, ever the master of debate, leaned back against his desk, arms crossed, his smirk creeping back. He refused to let a 19-year-old rattle him. Clever, he said, nodding slightly. But let's not pretend that. Faith isn't largely performative. Most people wear symbols like armor because deep down, they need the validation, strip away the rituals. The prayers, the symbols. What's left? Barron tilted his head, considering the question. Conviction, he said simply. Dr. Graves let out a small laugh, shaking his head. And what does conviction mean without evidence? You can be convicted about anything. Flat earth ghosts, fairies in your backyard, that doesn't make it true. Barron remained unfazed. What about love? He asked. The professor raised an eyebrow. What about it? You can't measure it. You can't put it in a test tube, but people live and die for it every day. Does that make love an illusion? Murmur ripped through the class. Dr. Graves opened his mouth. It was the kind of hesitation that lasted barely a second, but said everything. Barron didn't wait for a response. He leaned forward slightly, his voice steady. You always ask why people believe in God. Let me ask you something. Why do you care so much? Why does someone else's faith bother you?